Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel. On March 26, 1953, American medical researcher Dr. Jonas Salk announces on a national radio show that he has successfully tested a vaccine against poliomyelitis, the virus that causes the crippling disease of polio. In 1952, an epidemic year for polio, there were 58,000 new cases reported in the United States, and more than 3,000 died from the disease. For his work in helping to eradicate the disease, which is known as infant paralysis, because it mainly affects children, Dr. Salk was celebrated as the great doctor benefactor of his time. Polio, a disease that affected humanity many times throughout recorded history, attacks the nervous system and can cause varying degrees of paralysis. Since the virus is easily transmitted, epidemics were commonplace in the first decades of the 20th century. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel. The first major polio epidemic in the United States occurred in Vermont in the summer of 1894, and by the 20th century thousands were affected every year. In the first decades of the 20th century, treatments were limited to quarantines and the infamous iron lung, a metal coffin-like contraption that aided respiration. Although children, and especially infants, were among the worst affected, adults were also often afflicted, including future President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who in 1921 was stricken with polio at the age of 39 and was left partially paralyzed. Roosevelt later transformed his estate in Warm Springs, Georgia, into a recovery retreat for polio victims and was instrumental in raising funds for polio-related research and the treatment of polio patients. Salk, born in New York City in 1914, first conducted research on viruses in the 1930s when he was a medical student at New York University, and during World War II helped develop flu vaccines. In 1947, he became head of a research laboratory at the University of Pittsburgh and in 1948 was awarded a grant to study the polio virus and develop a possible vaccine. By 1950, he had an early version of his polio vaccine. Salk's procedure, first attempted unsuccessfully by American Maurice Brodie in the 1930s, was to kill several strains of the virus and then inject the benign viruses into a healthy person's bloodstream. The person's immune system would then create antibodies designed to resist future exposure to poliomyelitis. Salk conducted the first human trials on former polio patients and on himself and his family, and by 1953 was ready to announce his findings. This occurred on the CBS National Radio Network on the evening of March 26 and 2 days later in an article published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Dr. Salk became an immediate celebrity. In 1954, clinical trials using the Salk vaccine and a placebo began on 1.3 million American schoolchildren. In April 1955, it was announced that the vaccine was effective and safe, and a nationwide inoculation campaign began. Shortly thereafter, tragedy struck in the western and midwestern United States, when more than 200,000 people were injected with a defective vaccine manufactured at Cutter Laboratories of Berkeley, California. Thousands of polio cases were reported, 200 children were left paralyzed and 10 died. The incident delayed production of the vaccine, but new polio cases dropped under 6,000 in 1957, the first year after the vaccine was widely available. In 1962, an oral vaccine developed by Polish-American researcher Albert Sabin became available, greatly facilitating the distribution of the polio vaccine. Today, there is no year-round transmission of poliovirus in the United States. Among other honors, Jonas Salk was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977. He died in La Jolla, California, in 1995. Dr. Jonas Salk announced the successful development of the polio vaccine on March 26, 1953. His discovery was a major breakthrough in the fight against polio, a highly contagious and often debilitating disease that primarily affected children. The vaccine, which used inactivated poliovirus, was tested in large-scale trials, including the famous 1954 field trials involving over 1.8 million children. On April 12, 1955, researchers officially declared the vaccine safe, effective, and potent, leading to widespread immunization efforts that drastically reduced polio cases worldwide. Salk refused to patent the vaccine, famously stating, "There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?" His work saved millions of lives and laid the foundation for global polio eradication efforts. Dr. Jonas Salk and the historic polio vaccine announcement. On March 26, 1953, Dr. Jonas Salk went on a national radio program to announce a breakthrough that would change the world. He had successfully developed a vaccine against poliomyelitis, more commonly known as polio. At the time, polio was one of the most feared diseases in the United States and around the world, causing paralysis and death, particularly among children. The polio epidemic. A nation in fear before the vaccine, polio outbreaks devastated families. The disease spread quickly, especially in summer months, and left thousands of children in iron lungs, large machines that helped them breathe after polio paralyzed their muscles. Parents were terrified, closing swimming pools and keeping children indoors. In 1952, the U.S. saw 57,628 cases, the worst outbreak in history, with thousands left paralyzed or dead. Salk's revolutionary approach to drive. Salk, a virologist at the University of Pittsburgh, had been working with a team of researchers to develop a killed virus vaccine, meaning it used an inactivated version of the polio virus that could trigger an immune response without causing the disease. His approach was different from that of his rival, Dr. Albert Sabin, who was working on a live virus vaccine that would later be used in oral form. By 1952, Salk had successfully tested the vaccine on animals, his own laboratory workers, and even himself, his wife, and his children. By 1953, he was confident enough to announce it publicly. The massive 1954 field trial. In 1954, a massive field trial, the largest in history at the time, was launched to test the vaccine on 1.8 million children, nicknamed polio pioneers. The results, announced on April 12, 1955, were a triumph. The vaccine was found to be safe, effective, and potent. The announcement came exactly 10 years after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death, a symbolic moment, as Roosevelt himself had been a victim of polio and was a key figure in funding polio research. Salk's famous decision, no patent. Despite the potential to make millions, Salk famously declined to patent the vaccine, stating in a television interview, "There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?" This selfless decision allowed for rapid mass production, and within just a few years, polio cases plummeted by over 90% in the U.S. The success of Salk's vaccine led to widespread vaccination campaigns around the world. The later years in polio eradication efforts. By the 1960s, Dr. Albert Sabin's oral polio vaccine, OPV, using a weakened live virus, became more widely used because it was easier to administer and provided longer-lasting immunity. Today, a combination of both vaccines has nearly eradicated polio worldwide, though outbreaks still occur in a few regions. Jonas Salk continued his research until his death in 1995, working on vaccines for influenza, HIV, and even cancer. His legacy remains one of the most profound in medical history, as his work spared millions from the horrors of polio. The race to defeat polio, Jonas Salk's triumph and legacy. By the early 1950s, polio was one of the most dreaded diseases in the world. It struck without warning, leaving thousands of children paralyzed each year. Parents lived in fear, and cities imposed strict quarantines during summer outbreaks.